Conscience doth make cowards of us all. 5 reasons to be bold. This is not a wet blanket appeal to morality designed to assuage the fragile and comfort the weak. It's a qualitative look at reality as it unfolds in history and in human nature. Reason 0, master boldness, or boldness will master you. The word bold comes from the Old English word beald, meaning brave, and from the Proto-Germanic word balthas, meaning bold or strong, reflecting their warrior culture. Boldness has become a scarce commodity in a world where ideology trumps truth and the will to comfort is paramount. Throughout history, there's been a recurrent cycle. Civilizations rise with a burst of vitality and fearless action, then succumb to comfort, complacency, and descend into moralistic guilt and self-doubt before collapsing. In short, nothing lasts forever. Pre-Socratic Greece captured this essence through the concept of thumos, a dynamic force translated as spiritedness, heart, passion, or courage, balancing reason, translated from the word logos, and appetite, translated from the word epithumia. Jonathan Bowden stated in his speech titled Hope for the Future, Vanguardism, that, quote, "There has to be a logic to the logic of logic," end quote, reminding us that beneath rationality lies the primal drive of thumos, without which reason itself stagnates. More on this shortly. Feudal Japan embodied boldness through Bushido, similar to Western chivalry. Bushido was the warrior ethos integrating Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, Taoism, and Shintoism. Bushido's principles perhaps culminated in the Hagakure, a collection of anecdotes and maxims emphasizing fearless action, decisiveness, and honor unto death. The book was given both symbolically and as an instruction manual to the kamikaze pilots during World War II. This martial intensity mirrors the Germanic fury Nietzsche tapped into, contrasting sharply against the slave morality he attributed to Christianity. In an essay titled Wotan, Carl Jung observed that Christianity's decline in Germany had removed a crucial restraint on the collective psyche, leaving it vulnerable to possession by Wotan, the ancient Germanic war god. It could be observed that the decline in Christianity was similar to the abolition of feudalism in Japan, leaving them with violent thumotic energy untethered to a cultural framework. Japan's wartime alignment with Germany represented a fusion of these two powerful yet untethered thumotic drives. Thus, reason 0 stands as historically self-evident. Master boldness, or boldness will master you. During World War II, young writer Yukio Mishima, who, having evaded frontline military service by faking illness, was relegated to factory labor and thus deprived of the heroic death he so desired. After the war, he descended into profound depression, fueled by guilt and self-disgust. This emotional turmoil would later become the crucible in which Mishima forged his radical artistic and philosophical stance. Mishima was a literary genius, right-wing nationalist, and a descendant of samurai heritage, and was profoundly influenced by Friedrich Nietzsche and Oscar Wilde. He drew heavily on Wilde's concept of aestheticism, the pursuit of art purely for its own sake, untethered from morality or political ideals. Mishima was keenly aware of Nietzsche's emphasis on thumos and on Greek mythology, particularly in reference to the spirited vitality of Dionysus that stood defiantly opposed to the order and morality of Apollo. Mishima saw the Hagakure as the practical bridge between Wilde's artistic yet impractical theory of aestheticism and Nietzsche's fiery celebration of passionate action and the will to power. Chapter 11 of the Hagakure states, quote, "Learning such things as military tactics is useless if one does not strike out by simply closing his eyes and rushing into the enemy. Even if it is only one step, he will be of no use," end quote. Mishima accordingly advocated for an art defined by intensity, violent when necessary, and relentlessly scathing in its criticism. This attitude is exemplified by his cantankerous reaction following the court ruling against his novel After the Banquet. He stated in an essay that, quote, This verdict is based on an evaluation of art according to its social validity, a disdain for the autonomy of art, a disdain for the totality of art, and other short-sighted views that have been the norm since the days of the Meiji government. Instead of judging a work of art as a piece of literature, or whatever it happens to be, the tendency is to pounce on one part of it and complain that this part is offensive. I do not fortunately have the bourgeois habit of passively enjoying beauty as a kind of nourishment for the mind. Bourgeois types like to follow a typical mammalian procedure in everything: ingestion, masticulation, digestion, elimination. It is the same whether they are tackling Shakespeare, Cézanne, or no. It is this that is known as, quote, culture in bourgeois society. True beauty is something that attacks, overpowers, robs, and finally destroys. Culture is no more than a kind of life insurance taken out against the dangerous blandishments of beauty. End quote. Mishima not only advocated for scathing criticism, but physical violence when necessary. In his novel Runaway Horses, the protagonist states that, quote, perfect purity is possible if you turn your life into a line of poetry written with a splash of blood. End quote. Ultimately, this statement would become one of many ominous foreshadowings of his final statement, a ritualized suicide following a botched attempt at a military coup, which many believed was an artistic gesture, finalizing his desire to turn his life into a work of art. Yet, Mishima's suicide was also a political protest against Japan's post-war demilitarization, the imposition of an American-style constitution, and what he perceived as a cultural descent into weakness, guilt, and moralistic paralysis. This echoed a historical pattern evident in the transition from pre-Socratic Greece, where vigorous thumos dominated, into the Socratic age, which was characterized by sterile rationality and abstract logic. Similarly, in the 21st century, Anglo-Saxon identity struggles with an internalized guilt complex arising from historical conquest, fueling self-directed resentment. The colonization of America, often broadly dismissed as merely racist or evil, demands a more nuanced examination. Colonialism by Nigel Biggar is an honest and objective work of historical analysis, which directly confronts and challenges this monolithic narrative of colonialism as pure evil. It contrasts Britain's colonial motives with explicitly racist ideologies, such as those embodied by Nazi Germany. Ultimately, the British colonization of America was rooted in their desire to practice Protestantism freely, far from the violent and oppressive reach of Catholic Spain. Beyond religious freedom, these colonizing efforts were propelled by critical security concerns, economic ambitions, and the strategic necessity of militating against Spanish dominance. The English demonstrated impressive foresight, anticipating potential aggression from the Spanish. In a sense, England saw that the Spanish would do to the English what the French ultimately did to the Spanish. The latter violent brutality was depicted in Goya's etchings of the Peninsular War. England was spared this tragedy through their foresight and boldness. This brings us to reason 1. Difficult does not mean impossible. The resolute determination of the English to confront daunting challenges echoes Napoleon's bold assertion in 1800, when he led his army through the Alps to gain a strategic advantage to attack the Austrian army. The latter feat was said to be impossible, to which Napoleon responded famously with, "There shall be no Alps." Such a statement embodies a thumotic drive to both do the impossible and overcome the insurmountable, an unyielding ambition for national and spiritual supremacy. In logic, impossibility is governed by the law of non-contradiction, which states that two contradictory propositions cannot simultaneously hold true. A square circle, for instance, is logically impossible because the defining properties of squares and circles inherently exclude each other. Yet many perceived impossibilities in life arise not from genuine logical contradictions, but rather from practical barriers or perceived limitations. Napoleon's proclamation, though audacious, was logically sound. He recognized that difficulty, however extreme, does not equal genuine impossibility. Ironically, this very ethos was later reflected back upon the French during World War II, when the Germans, through their actions, effectively declared there shall be no Ardennes, underscoring the cyclical nature of historical boldness. Therefore, it becomes essential not only to strive towards overcoming perceived impossibilities, but also to anticipate that our adversaries might do likewise. Individuals or nations driven by logic combined with thumos, prerogative power, and hagakure intuition, a point we shall explore further, are uniquely positioned to succeed. Indeed, the bold thumotic actor is fundamentally rational. He discerns genuine impossibility from mere improbability and skillfully fuses reason with passionate action. This historical irony demonstrates that discerning between practical difficulty and true impossibility is not mere reckless bravado. Rather, it is a profound insight that shapes the destiny of a nation. Reason 2. Boldness is protective. The Australian Constitution, widely recognised as one of the finest ever drafted, was created by a group of visionaries who prioritised practicality above abstract idealism. Recently, however, it has been subject to efforts at a moral subversion, efforts defined not by strength or vitality, but by a sickly fixation on moral purity. This scenario contrasts sharply with the life-affirming ethos demonstrated historically by the Germanic tribes during the Battle of Teutony, where the Vandals decisively overcame the exhausted Roman forces. In response to threats of moralistic corrosion, Australia's constitutional framers embedded Section 61, granting the executive branch significant prerogative power to override both the legislature and judiciary in times of national crisis, ensuring the Constitution's preservation. This power embodies a thumotic impulse, a spirited and decisive action reminiscent of Jonathan Bowden's philosophy of cultural vanguardism. The essential nature of prerogative power is highlighted in the High Court's decision of Ruddock and Vardalos. Here, the court affirmed that the executive's prerogative power, rooted in the Constitution, was not displaced by the Migration Act 1958, thereby reinforcing the government's right to decisive action on immigration. Justice French stated, quote, "The power to determine who may come into Australia is so central to its sovereignty that it is not to be supposed that the government of the nation would lack, under the power conferred upon it directly by the Constitution, the ability to prevent people not part of the Australian community from entering," end quote. Thus, boldness involves defending oneself against the corrosive influence of excessive moralism. It ensures the continued preservation of the nation's foundational values and guarantees the security of its people. Both the Japanese Hagakure and Section 61 of the Australian Constitution share a common principle, the preservation of integrity under threat. The Hagakure emphasizes preserving spiritual integrity through physical self-sacrifice, whereas Section 61 ensures structural integrity through the decisive executive action. In this sense, both represent boldness as a fundamentally conservative force designed explicitly to safeguard essential elements, whether spiritual or national, against moralistic and ideological decay. Reason 3. Boldness is life-affirming. Boldness involves a profound commitment to self-actualization, and frankly, it often feels exhilarating. It is the outright rejection of weakness, the conscious repudiation of resentment, and a wholehearted embrace of life in all its chaotic uncertainty. Nietzsche articulates this well in The Antichrist in chapter 2, where he states, quote, "What is good? Whatever augments the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself in man. What is evil? Whatever springs from weakness. What is happiness? The feeling that power increases, that resistance is overcome, not contentment but more power, not peace at any price but war, not virtue but efficiency, virtue in the Renaissance sense, virtu, virtue free of moral acid. The weak and the botched shall perish, first principle of our charity, and one should help them to it. What is more harmful than any vice? Practical sympathy for the botched and the weak, Christianity. End quote. Nietzsche's philosophy urges us to transcend debilitating moral guilt and embrace strength unapologetically. In essence, Nietzsche reminds us that true boldness rejects moralistic restraints and the crippling burden of forced compassion. Instead, it celebrates an authentic, vigorous, and life-affirming power, one that enriches the human spirit through overcoming resistance and reveling in triumph. However, boldness does not necessarily mean cruelty, which brings us to reason 4. Boldness is ethical, aggressive but not sadistic. In Chapter 8 of The Prince, Machiavelli examines those who rise to power through force, cruelty, and deception, figures such as Agathocles of Syracuse. While he acknowledges that such methods can be effective for seizing control, he raises serious concerns about their lasting value. Machiavelli draws a sharp distinction between acquiring power and attaining glory. Ruthless violence may secure a throne, but it seldom earns respect, enduring legitimacy. He warns that cruelty must be swift, strategic, and limited to the consolidation of power. Otherwise, it corrodes reputation and invites hatred. In this view, true boldness lies not in reckless savagery, but in calculated action tempered with ethical foresight. Similarly, the art of war emphasizes that it is preferable to capture a city intact rather than destroy it entirely, aligning closely, although subtly contrasting, with the samurai philosophy of the Hagakure, which teaches that one must be willing to sacrifice their physical self to preserve their honor. At their core, both philosophies advocate preserving something essential, whether it is the integrity and structure of the city or the moral integrity and honor of the individual, though from fundamentally distinct angles. Where the Hagakure prioritizes spiritual integrity even at the cost of physical existence, Machiavelli champions the preservation of power and reputation, occasionally at the expense of personal honor. Both approaches underline boldness, yet diverge significantly in their philosophical and practical implications. Ultimately, true boldness demands decisive, assertive actions combined with ethical consideration. The balance between maintaining one's honor, asserting power, and preserving reputation is delicate, and precisely how one achieves this equilibrium is a judgment each individual must make for themselves. Reason 5. Boldness can lead us into a relationship with a higher power. Psalm 144:1 encapsulates this idea of militant preparedness. Quote, "Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for battle and my fingers for warfare." End quote. In this verse, God can be interpreted, as Nietzsche similarly asserts in The Antichrist, as that force which fosters strength and martial readiness. This divine preparation is similar to Machiavelli's ideal ruler, who is bold yet restrained, courageous but not gratuitously cruel. For instance, King David's choice to spare Saul when he could have easily killed him evinces this perfect blend of boldness and restraint. David's control ultimately established his trustworthiness among the inhabitants of Israel, allowing him to ascend the throne after Saul recklessly pursued him. Saul's pursuit of David led him to neglect his kingdom and allowed the Philistines to exploit Saul's obsessive cruelty by invading whilst he was completely distracted and wiping out his entire bloodline. This lesson underscores how internalized guilt, seen today in modern Anglo-Saxon self-loathing, echoes Nietzsche's notion of slave morality, where imposed moral frameworks erode cultural vitality or thumos. When guilt transforms into an internal adversary, it becomes a clear signal that we must confront and conquer our fears decisively. Action becomes an existential necessity, for inaction breeds internal destruction. Conclusion. In closing, my kings, I urge you, do not go quietly into the night. Reject the sickness of weakness and the poison of revisionist history. Embrace your heritage proudly. Embrace who you truly are and march boldly forward. Step decisively over guilt and shame, and let the unbreakable spirit of your ancestors live and thrive within you. God bless Australia. God bless the Anglosphere. Long live Nietzsche. Long live Wotan. Turn your life into a masterpiece, a work of art drawn boldly with a splash of blood.